Well, the mood is festive and carnival-like. It's the celebration of Passover in the great city of Jerusalem, the highlight of the year. Every year, the faithful gather in the holy city to remember, to celebrate the deliverance, the Exodus. God delivered the Hebrews from Egyptian slavery, and the deliverance of God is worthy of a celebration and a festival. So every year, early spring, the faithful would pack up their kids in an ancient equivalent of an SUV and make their way to the holy city, because there was going to be a series of celebrations, grand every year. So every Jewish family counting down the days until the great celebration is upon them and the pace is quickening, they're headed to Jerusalem. Jesus is going too. But trouble has been brewing for the carpenter's son from Nazareth. Until recently, nobody much had heard of Jesus. He wasn't born to prominent parents, and in fact, there was a nasty rumor about his mother. His dad was a simple carpenter. But recently, in the quiet villages of Galilee, their exceptional son was beginning to make a name for himself. And sometimes his particular power is showing even before he wanted word to spread. For instance, you remember that he and his mother went to a wedding, Cana of Galilee. They ran out of wine. His mother told him to do something about it. He resisted because he said to his mother, "It's not yet my time." But he did. He turned the water to wine. Word starts getting out about stuff like that. A little later, he healed the son of a royal official. You heal a kid, word's going to get out. And it did. Then he heals a blind man. I mean, by the time you get this many healings going in a small countryside, it's not a secret anymore. By the time he's teaching at the Sea of Galilee, 5,000 people crowding and elbowing just to get a glimpse of the miracle worker. And then when he fed those 5,000 people from a kid's lunchbox, people went home saying, "Could this be the one? We've been talking about Messiah. Could this be the one?" Well, now Jesus is getting ready to go to Jerusalem to partake in the great festival of Passover. And he's staying with his friends, Mary and Martha, Lazarus. In their home just a couple of miles away in Bethany. Lazarus is really sick. Jesus stayed a couple of days longer than he expected. He was really sick. But Jesus left. And Lazarus died, and Martha had to go catch up with Jesus to tell him about the death of her brother. And Jesus said, "Your brother will rise again. I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live." And Lazarus got up. Lazarus was raised from the dead. Do you think word is out now? The little town of Bethany, just 2 miles from Jerusalem, is completely abuzz with speculation and wonder and whisper. This could be the one. So, that day when Jesus laces up his sandals and heads out the door to take the 2-mile walk into Jerusalem for the festival of Passover, there is a huge crowd in his wake. So now we've got the regular festival clamor and an even bigger commotion because throngs of people are now craning to get a glimpse of the celebrity, the miracle worker who's making his way into the center of the city. The pace is quickening. They're on their way to Jerusalem. But there's another group on their way to Jerusalem too. The Roman government has hired a few overtime workers. Rome rules. Rome is in power, and power protects power. And they get up on their horses, and from horse to horse, mount to mount, one of the Roman soldiers says to another, "It's fine for these Jews to get together and have their little festival. I mean, heck, they're only about 10% of the population, but still, we'll show them who's in power." The police, the military guard, armed soldiers, power belongs to Rome. Let's remind them who's in charge. You have your little party, that's fine. We are in power. But an underlying theme of every Passover celebration is the call for Messiah. And things seem a little more agitated this year than usual. The Passover celebration includes prayers for the Messiah. The Jewish people are looking for the one who is coming, the one who will restore the kingdom. Because you remember, for a short while, the Israelites were in power. King David, King Solomon. King was not just a nickname. They were kings. They were sovereign. The power belonged to the Israelites, and they believed it would again. There is one coming, a Messiah, a Savior, a new David, and when Messiah comes, we will be delivered again, just like the first Passover, and there'll be a new celebration. But today we gather to remember that God once delivered in the Exodus and to remind each other that God will deliver again because Messiah is coming. And the Roman power knows well 10% of the population or not, that kind of political talk is worth keeping an eye on. The Roman muscle will be in force. Let's call in some off-duty officers. Let's authorize some overtime pay. The pace is quickening. They're all headed to Jerusalem. So can you feel it? Like Dr. Hull said a moment ago, 2,000 years later, we can still feel it. There's a showdown about to happen in Jerusalem. The faithful Jews are on their way to Jerusalem, and the soundtrack's getting louder. Jesus is walking the 2 miles to the holy city. There's a throng behind him saying, "This might be the Messiah." And the Roman power machine has taken to horseback, and they're not taking it lightly. The crowd's in a frenzy shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." And if a crowd starts referring to a Galilean Jew as king, well, it's time for a showdown. The Roman power is about to flex. And they grab arms and mount their stallions and ready themselves for the face-off that's about to happen. Doesn't this have all the dramatic elements of the great show, kind of a Gary Cooper High Noon kind of thing, right? We instinctively feel the setup. We know that we're in the last scenes of the drama, and we know what a power showdown looks like. In every drama of power, we know what to expect. It's a formula almost. It's a successful formula for most of our movies because it's so instinctively satisfying. There's power, there's good and evil, and at the end, there's going to be this violent clash. You know Luke Skywalker is going to win a violent showdown so that the dark side doesn't win. You knew from early on in Lethal Weapon that Mel Gibson's going to have to fight Gary Busey. Right there in Sergeant Murtaugh's front yard. It's got to happen because good's got to win. You know in The Karate Kid when Mr. Miyagi's student Daniel has to fight Johnny from Cobra Kai. the violent crane kick is going to end it, right? You just know. I didn't do the whole crane kick, but you got it. We know what to expect. We know how Palm Sunday ought to end. And everybody there knew it too. Those who were cheering and waving palms, they knew. And they were waving palms, by the way, because another great warrior of their past, Judas Maccabeus, once rode into Jerusalem on a magnificent war horse, on this muscular stallion. And on that day, they laid palms in front of that horse, and Judas Maccabeus raised a sword. And they're waiting again for that kind of hero. For the one who's going to ride in with a knife in his teeth and who's ready to defeat the dark side with violence. We know what these look like. And Rome knows too. That's why all the overtime officers, that's why the show of force, they have the power and they're ready for whatever little uprising the festival goers have in store. And this is where the story goes completely off the rails. Because we know what to expect and none of it happens. Everything gets upended from everything we had expected. Nothing goes like we anticipate. Because the gospel of Jesus Christ is here and forever upside down from our expectation. Especially when power is concerned. When Jesus comes down the street, he's on a donkey. And no raised sword, he just smiles and waves and galumps down the middle of town. And he holds in himself power, real power. Not a sword, not a knife, power. And he says, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. The ruler of this world is sword and violence and muscle and dominance, and it's over. That's not what power really looks like. Charles Campbell says, he comes not as one who lords his authority over others, but as one who humbly rejects domination. He comes not with pomp and wealth, but as one identified with the poor. He comes not as a mighty warrior, but as one who is vulnerable and who refuses to rely on violence. This is real power. Power is contained, and power blesses, and power brings peace. Power doesn't flex and slash and pummel. Real power looks like a guy on a donkey. Well, I hear you. I hear you say, yeah, that's a good Sunday school lesson. That's what I want you to teach my third grader and all, but I live in a real world. Eat or get eaten. If you ride a donkey in my business, you're going to get run over. So that's fine for church, but well, I'm not so sure. I heard this story from John Ball's former pastor. I don't know if you recognize the name John Ball or not, but he was the founding president of Cisco Foods, a real involved Baptist layman in Texas. Now, you do recognize Cisco Foods because you've seen it in every restaurant you've ever been in. There's labels on drinking straws and napkins and sugar packets and all kind of restaurant supplies. In fact, Jerry Goldsmith and I had breakfast Friday morning at OK Cafe, and I walked out. There was a big Cisco Foods truck making their delivery. But before Cisco Foods existed, there were several regional suppliers, a few in Houston, a few in Atlanta, a few in Boston, and so forth. And they'd had informal conversations about what it might look like if these mom and pop suppliers came together to form one big national company. And finally, they thought the time was right and that the smart move was to consolidate and become a national food supplier. And the idea is that they would own the percentage of the new company that their company was worth. In other words, if the company in Austin was worth $2 million, company in Memphis was worth $1 million, when they all came together, the Austin company would have twice as many shares as the Memphis company, right? So they all flew in from all over the country to meet in a conference room on Wall Street. Each of the independent owners showed up, brought a lawyer or two or three who all had swords and wore stallions, and were going to make sure they pounded out the terms and not cheated on their slice of the pie. Well, then how do you get started? How do you ensure accurate values and percentages and all that? When finally a Jewish owner of one of these companies from New England proposed this idea. He said, why don't we just all turn our files over to Johnny Ball and let him take them back to Texas and send these lawyers home? He'll do the math. We'll meet up later and he'll tell us our percentage. Johnny's the one guy around the table we can all trust. Just give your files to Johnny and he'll let us know later. And when the deal was over, that group also elected John Ball to be the first president of the newly formed Cisco Foods. That's what real power looks like. It's not violent. The power Jesus came to bring is a power of character. And I'm going to make an invitation and a warning. I invite you to follow this Christ. His way is life-giving, life-changing. I invite you, if you have not already, to join this church and be partner with us in the enterprise of Christ in this city and beyond. But my warning is this: if you do, you're committing to this upside-down way of living. You're committing to following the one who rides a donkey and not a war stallion. You're committing to living a life of power that's born from within. Would you stand and sing and make your commitments as we continue in worship together?